There we go. And Liz, can you mute yourself, please? I think you've just come in towards the end there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh.
Okay, so we're talking about the earth changes, and there's so many of them happening. It's quite overwhelming. And really what I'm looking at here is literally the last couple of weeks. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in the session this evening is the Shambhala Conclave of 2025, how that's connected to VSAC and the Himalayas, and of course the hierarchy. I'll talk a little bit, not much, about the eclipse window, but it's important to keep in mind the dates, 8th of March through to the 19th of April. That's the window for the current eclipse. And we'll look at the earthquakes that have happened, roughly speaking, in March and through till April. And we'll also look at just what's happening with the tectonic plates and how that's connected to various earth changes that are happening. At the moment, Zachary will be talking about the tectonic plates and what that's all about. There are so many earthquakes happen on the planet that I really just tried to keep it to anything from 5 and above. Yeah, because there's hundreds or sometimes thousands of them. Okay. So for those who may not be aware, once every 100 years, there's a gathering of the Holy Ones of Earth, and it's always in the 25th year of the century, and that's the year we're in at the moment. And this gathering occurs at the VSAC festival, which is when the sun is in Taurus and the moon's in Scorpio. And the reason for this gathering, such as we understand it, is so that the Earth's hierarchy can figure out how on earth they can help humanity, because let's face it, we need help. And so they meet in Shambhala, which is not a physical place on the planet. It's in the etheric levels of Earth, known as the City of Gold or the City of Peace. And it's not just Earth's hierarchy, that the Buddhas are past, present, and future, the Chauhans, the Holy Mothers, but it's also the Interplanetary Council and no doubt members from Sirius. And the purpose of this is to assist humanity in our evolutionary step forward, basically to be better humans, to live at peace with each other on the planet, and to take guardianship over the planet. I was reading something by one of a theosophist, and he'd expressed it very clearly just recently, and he said there are 3 things that the hierarchy are trying to help us with. And I thought he was right. He mentioned the principle of peace, living in peace, which of course is 4th ray, and being able to work with that energy of harmony. A degree or a measure of sharing, and this is particularly associated with the first initiation, and it's the Lord DK talks about it as the sharing of bread, or the well, just you might say that it's also to do with shelter, yeah, and the collaboration or the reconfiguration or the reorganisation of the world religions, so that we eventually will move towards what's known as the New World Religion, where we will have a reverence for all the world teachers, whatever ray, whatever frequency, whatever culture they come in upon. So it's very exciting really to be living in 2025 and know that the conclave will be occurring, and that there will be major decisions made. And of course we must remember that we have free will. And so by and large, the hierarchy don't intervene, they don't override our free will, but I think there are probably times when a certain amount of intervention has to occur, either because we're too slow in our growth, or because we're harming the planet or the animals. Think of the extinction rate. So many reasons why there may need to be an intervention. Now, what the interventions are, well, we know because of the end of the dinosaurs that they can be, you know, fire, earth, air or water. They can be great floods. They can be fire coming from the heart of Earth. They can be missiles coming through our solar system. And of course, humanity do it all to themselves with war. Whenever I think about 2025 and the next few years, I think about the birth initiation. You might think of it as a transformational period. And I can't help, being a mother of several children, I've always associated the birth initiation, the first initiation, with the contractions of labour before a child is born. And it's interesting that we know that as above, so below. And the scientists of the world have a scale for measuring the contractions, the earthquakes on Earth. And there are two different scales. There's the Richter scale, which has been in place since, I think, 1933, somewhere like that. And prior to that, there's something called the MMI. I forget what that stands for. And the difference between the two of these, I discovered just today, is that the Richter scale is scientifically measurements according to whatever the scientists have at hand. And the MMI scale is a word of mouth. It's the experience of people and what they see and observe when there's an earthquake happening around them. And they differ, I discovered, a little bit. So if something's a 7 on the Richter scale, it's an 8 or maybe even a 9 on the MMI scale. Anyway, just as a woman in labour will go through mild contractions, medium strength contractions, very intense contractions, and then birth, I think this is what's been happening on the planet for, I don't know, is it 50 years, maybe since the Second World War, that the Earth's contractions are getting more and more intense. Okay, now some of the records, and particularly I think it's the Americans, I think their website's the USGS, they don't even mention the contractions or the earthquakes that are 9s. As far as they're concerned, they just don't exist. But it doesn't take much when you're doing a little bit of looking around on the internet to discover that there are several. Well, several might be an exaggeration, but certainly I came upon 3 in the level of 9 and above. And this is 9 on the Richter scale, which is a 10 or an 11 in the old scale. Yeah? These are absolutely enormous. And there was a 9.5 in Chile in 1960. There was a 9.2 in Alaska in 64. And more recently, we know about the Boxing Day tsunami in Sumatra. Sometimes on the Richter scale, they say that's an 8.9, but I've also seen it written as a 9.1. So these extremely intense contractions generally decimate everything. And then if you look a bit further down on the Richter scale, anything that's an 8, and on average, we have one of these per year. So the scientists tell us, the seismologists tell us. But interestingly, we haven't had one since August 2021, if you can believe their ratings. So we're kind of overdue. Please interrupt at any time, Zachary. So we're overdue for one of these 8 on the Richter scale, because normally it's one every year. Yeah. And then in the period from 2017 through to 2021, I came upon, there's 7 there, 1 in Alaska, 1 in New Zealand, 1 in the Pacific, 1 in Peru, 1 in Fiji, 1 in Mexico. Yeah, absolutely momentous ones. And then below that, we have the 7s. Now, a 9 will destroy and annihilate everything. And an 8, pretty much the same. A 7, I don't know whether it was a 7 that hit Christchurch years ago. It's fairly significant damage. And on average, the seismologists tell us we get about 13 of those a year. Okay, so some years you can see from that table, some years we get sort of 9 or 10, but for instance, in 2021 or 2023, we had 19. Yeah, so it varies a little bit. All I can say is that thus far, we've had 4 in the 7 range. That's if you believe the USGS's figures, which may or may not be accurate. So there may be more. But we've had 4 so far just in the first 3 months of this year. Now, just as the baby can't be born until the woman's cervix is opened to 10 centimetres to fit the head out, as above, so below, humanity can't be born until we've had this maximum amount of contractions. Yes, and so this is what we're waiting for, is for the door to be opened. This is what the hierarchy have been waiting for, some might say since the Second World War. And no doubt this is what will be being contemplated at the conclave. Okay. I started to think about the earthquakes because there was a major quake in Myanmar just about a week ago. And of course, then I realised that we have this solar eclipse window. So just to explain, the solar eclipse was the 29th of March, but 3 weeks before that, starting from the 8th of March, and 3 weeks after that, through to the 19th of April, this is the window. So we have a 6-week window, which is a microcosm for the next 3 years on the planet. So if you seriously wrote down all the major events that happened in that 6-week period, including Earth changes, then no doubt we'd have a bit of a script for what is likely to happen on the next 3 years. And that's the astrological interpretation of the eclipses. Now, this that you can see here is the chart for Mandalay. And you'll see up here in the top left-hand corner, it was 10 to 12 on a Friday, the 28th of March. And I have marked here a couple of points. So you see the red line. Let me find the little light to show you. See this little red line here? That's the planet Mars, sitting right on the ascendant. Now, Mars is a non-sacred planet, and you don't want it sitting on the body of anything, particularly when it's got squares, as this one does, up to Chiron. Yeah. The reason for this, Chiron looks like the letter K, and I've just marked it there. So the planetoid Chiron talks about crisis, and it's in Aries, associated with the new age that is being inaugurated. It's associated with an opportunity for us to use our free will effectively. So the Mars-Chiron square has a great deal to do with trauma. Now, if that was in an individual's chart, you'd say, well, look, you know, have you checked your brakes? Don't drive fast. You might end up in hospital. There could be some crisis that's going to impact your body, your health, the family. But this is exactly the time that the major, and they're saying it was a 7.7 quake, happened in Myanmar. Okay, there are other things in the chart. If you see all these planets here in Pisces, they're in the part of the chart associated with the international arena. And all the blue lines here, well, they're, I'm hoping, connected to the outpouring of support and aid and shelter and money and goodwill. Yeah. And of course, this is an opportunity that we have when one place on the planet has crisis, is to say, well, how can we help? And there's a great deal of that happening. But unfortunately, the Myanmar itself has been in civil war for a while. And so there are other matters. Zachary, did you want to say anything about that chart before I continue?
About the chart? Well, not necessarily. I think you've covered it.
Okay, great. I'll keep going. All right. Let me see if I can get the thing to move. There it is. All right. Now, one thing that I have to thank Philip Lindsay for, and I'd seen the earthquake happen, and I'd looked at the chart, but Philip Lindsay posted something about a week ago online, and he'd done the astrocartography map, which I'd failed to do. Now, the astrocartography is simply when you take the chart, you wrap it around the planet, you locate it at the place of the event, and you can see what happens. And lo and behold, Philip had pointed out, you see this little mark here, that's actually the Chinese spelling for Shigatse. And here's the Mars line. Yeah. So what we have here is the cataclysmic event, and it's come from Tibet. And there's the ascendant. So that's the body, and that's the Mars line. So effectively, we have a corridor of danger running from actually up in Kazakhstan, I think, via Tibet, down through Bangladesh, Burma, Thailand. It continues on down to Indonesia, and it actually goes down to, I think I saw it, I think it was impacting the southwestern part of Western Australia. And Philip had simply made the point when he posted this map online that was this earthquake a message from Shambhala in the lead up to the conclave. And I thought to myself, he's right. And then I remembered that on the 7th of January, just a couple of months earlier, just the first 1 week into the new year, there was a major earthquake at Shigatse itself, a 7.1. Now, this one occurred here at Mandalay, and the impact went on down through this corridor. So I thought, isn't that interesting? This is the second time in 3 months we've had an earthquake in the 7 or higher range that's come out of the Himalayas in the lead up to the Vesak. And of course, there's been a few aftershocks up in Shigatse, and I did read, and I can't remember, but there was a lot of loss of life up in Shigatse, and there were aftershocks in the 6s and a 4.9. I think they were later in January. Yeah. Okay, so all very interesting to ponder as an astrologer, because the astrocartography, it's a bit like if you you can look at your transits, for instance, and get a bit of an idea of what might be happening. But if you had a map that, and that's what astrocartography is, that takes the transits and directs the energy in a particular way, it's like a, well, to the astrologers, it's a smoking gun. Yeah. So this is a very strong message. And as I said, I've got Philip Lindsay to thank for it, because I hadn't done it until he mentioned it. Okay. Now, when I was looking, as I'm sure everybody has, at some of the terrible images that have happened, 2 things struck me. And one of them was that there were temples everywhere that were completely desecrated. And there were other ones where there was nothing touched, absolutely perfect, literally in the same town. I've no idea how far apart. So I thought, isn't that interesting? You know, why is it? What's the esoteric reason why a certain region would get a Mars Chiron earthquake coming out of the Himalayas? Yeah. And then I started to think about Myanmar, and I started to remember that how Aung San Suu Kyi was for decades locked up in house arrest, and how she was there to try and I think her father was actually assassinated, and so there's a family history. And she'd been for decades locked up and trying to bring democracy to Burma, yeah, which eventually the military junta gave way around about 2015, I forget the exact date, and she was allowed out of house arrest and apparently came to a position of power. And then myself, and no doubt lots of other people, watched in horror as she looked the other way, while the Rohingya Muslims were driven out of Myanmar and persecuted. Yeah, 2017. So there's a checkered kind of a history that she has. Okay, so I was contemplating all of that, thinking, why on earth would there be a 7.7 in Myanmar? And I couldn't help but think this is all connected. And then, of course, I was horrified to see that the military junta are still bombing people while there's aftershocks happening just in this last week. I don't know whether they've even stopped yet, but they certainly were. And then when I looked it up, I realised that there was some kind of token promise. Oh, well, we're going to have an election later in 2025 or maybe 2026, this carrot that's being hung out. It's like we're really going to do the right thing and listen to the people. So there's this history of oppression. Yeah. And I really don't know whether Aung San Suu Kyi has, holding the light of liberty and compassion, or whether she's continuing to say, well, I'll have power at whatever cost. I'm not sure. Okay, so there's some of the history of what's been happening, and that civil war's been going on since February 2021, so 4 years worth. Yeah. Okay, so this is the same map that I showed you before, with the energy coming out of the Himalayas through Shigatse, through this corridor of energy. And thus far, we don't appear to have had any big quakes in Malaysia or Indonesia, although there has been something down here in the Banda Sea. Yeah, and remembering that these quakes are responding and holding the energy of the eclipse, that means that they can occur over a 3-year period. And what happens with the eclipses is that when the and that particular eclipse was in the 10th degree of Aries, one of the cardinal signs, which simply means that things happen dramatically, and then again, and then again, and then again over the next 3 years. That's the nature of a cardinal eclipse. Yeah. Okay. I probably didn't point it out. I don't think I did. No. This is the planet Chiron. And see where Chiron went, and that's the Chiron on the midheaven in the chart. And where it crosses the corridor is the most volatile region. Yeah. Now, Bangkok was hit, Mandalay was hit, but if I was going to pick a place, I would say a circle around where the lines cross, which is just sort of a bit southwest of Bangkok there. So whether we get any more in this region remains to be seen. Okay, so far they're saying 3,000 people have lost their life. But I did hear someone say, well, it could be up to 10,000 people. I don't know. I did also, and there have been aftershocks. Just yesterday, a 5. I don't know what's happened in terms of the death toll in Bangkok, but I did see something about something called the Saging, maybe that's how you pronounce it, fault. And literally there's a rupture or a tear that goes for 500 kilometres. It's a bit like Melbourne to Sydney. Yeah. And lo and behold, they're using the same scanning equipment that they're using in Egypt in our discussion last week around what's under the pyramids. So this image over here on the left-hand side is the scan and the 500-kilometre rupture through that part of Burma and Thailand. Okay, so fairly momentous. Can you imagine a rupture from here to Sydney? It seems to me an awful lot for a 7.7, but I haven't ever lived through an earthquake, so I don't really know. And further down, as I said, that line, that Mars line, goes down towards Indonesia, and there has been on the 1st of April a 5.7 quake, and this was in the Banda Sea, which I think you can see there, and it was somewhere northeast of Timor-Leste, or of this pointy bit of Timor-Leste, somewhere around there. Now, this is a particularly volatile region. One, because there are a lot of the pyroclastic volcanoes in the region, and 2, because it's on the equator. Yeah? So it's a very dangerous area for us to have earthquakes. And then I did read that people had felt this particular quake in Darwin. And of course, there have been lots of aftershocks. Okay. And that's some of the aftershocks. And the aftershocks are 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s. And by the time the numbers get to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, That's when we get the major damage happening. Just today, for example, there's been 4 just today in the range of 5 or 6, remembering that that's according to the USGS and the Richter scale, and they may well be higher than that. And the interesting thing is that we have the mid-Atlantic, which I imagine is somewhere around the equator, is that right? Indonesia, around the equator, the dangerous zone, Alaska, up near the poles, and Japan on the Ring of Fire. And you can see, for instance, these red marks here. I think this one over here, that's the Tongan one, yes. Okay, I think Zachary was going to talk now about the plates. Thanks, Zach.
Okay, just a brief background. There's a lot of things going on the planet, both on the physical plane and, the more subtle planes, the mental plane, astral plane, of course. The powers that be and that means most leaders in government and the official scientific community or the official medical community or whatever, they're basically covering up what's happening. They're hiding it from the average person. They're giving out false information, misinformation, spin, propaganda, garbage, whatever you want to call it, with the purpose of trying to keep the masses dumbed down and placid. Don't get them excited, don't get them worried, don't inform them about what's really going on because they couldn't handle it and they might revolt and they might go crazy, whatever. We have to understand that's been going on for quite a while. And it seems to be getting worse, actually, as time goes on. Just a good example, in Europe, we looking back 2 or 3 sessions ago, 2 or 3 Zoom sessions ago, we talked about Europe and how the president of the European Commission is talking about going to war with Russia, but in the name of peace, of course. It's all about peace, but we should prepare for war and blah, blah, so we're really being given a lot of rubbish from the establishment, which is they want us to believe. And some people are dumb enough to believe it, sadly, but a lot of people are skeptical now. Okay, regarding the USGS, they basically trying to cover up the tremendous earth changes that have been ongoing for many years now. And they are basically dumbing down or reducing the severity of the earthquake magnitudes. That's on the Richter scale by somewhere around 1.5 to 2. So when we hear a report of a magnitude 6 quake, you can probably say it's probably about 7.5 or 8 in reality. And they've been doing this for a long time. Now, Chandra, I just wonder if you could go back to the previous slide, the one. Yeah, okay. Look to the east of Australia. You see those red circles where the quake, where there quakes. Does anyone know or intuit what that edge, that sort of rim represents?
Please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to get into discussion.
Okay, in my opinion, it is the eastern edge of the Australian plate, because we can see New Zealand down sort of, there seems to be a red blob north of the North Island and another smaller blob, a red circle down at the South Island. So these quakes are occurring on the eastern edge of the Australian plate. The eastern edge of the Australian plate is lifting, and that's because the plate to the east, which is the Pacific plate, is subducting or diving under that eastern edge. And as the Pacific plate, the western part of the Pacific plate subducts or dives under the eastern edge of the Australia plate, the Australia plate lifts. Now, this too has been covered up by the establishment, by the authorities, especially here. They don't want people to know that. They don't want people to understand it. The real reason, in my opinion, and you can make up your own mind, of course, the real reason for the terrific bushfires in the summer of 2019 to 2020, which we all know so well. The authorities want us to believe it's climate change, of course. It's greenhouse gas emissions into the environment, blah, blah, blah. and that's causing the greenhouse effect, and the environment's heating up, so we had these terrible fires. Well, the reality, in my opinion, has nothing whatsoever to do with that. The reality is that when the eastern edge of the Australian plate lifted, as it has been doing for quite a while now, years or in fact decades, and when it lifts to a significant distance up, what you get is magma from the hot core of the earth rushing up to fill the void that is left by the lifting eastern edge of the plate. So the terrible bushfires of 2019, 2020, in my opinion, were not at all related in any way to global warming or greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. They are actually because the magma from the Earth's core was rushing to fill the gap left by the lifting eastern edge of the plate. And of course, the authorities don't want us to know this. They don't want us to understand this. At the same time, I noticed that the conspiracy theory crowd were full of information. They're full of theories about laser beams from space being shot down from satellites to start the fires because they wanted to. The government wanted to clear the area for a direct line, the Melbourne to Sydney fast train. And of course, that is so absurd, it boggles the mind. But of course, a lot of people hook into this stuff because they don't know the reality of what's actually going on. They don't understand that the tectonic plates of the Earth are shifting and shaking and moving around as they have not done for the last 3,500 years. Actually make that 3,600 years. And I don't have the time to explain what that figure represents or what relates to the past history. We just don't have the time. So could we proceed to the next slide, Chandra?
Yes, I forgot to mention, see down here in the bottom left-hand corner, it says April 2nd to April 3rd. So this map is simply the quakes that are from 4 up in the last 24 hours. Yeah? So that gives you some idea of the intensity of what's going on.
The eastern side of the Australian plate is lifting. It's moving and shifting, and you know they just don't want us to know that. Simple as that. So they'll tell us anything. They'll invent any excuse, any lies, no matter how outrageous, no matter how stupid, to keep the people dumb and dumber. And for the majority of the people, that's been quite successful. Sad to say, but that's the world we live in. Okay, let's look at the Burma plate. The Burma plate, as you can see in this diagram, is sort of in the middle of the map. And the Burma plate basically is mainly covering islands. It's covering the ocean, or it's underneath the ocean, I should say. And I'll quote now from the Wikipedia entry on the Burma plate. Quote, "The Burma plate is a minor tectonic plate or microplate located in the Southeast Asia, sometimes considered a part of the larger Eurasian plate." And we'll look at the closer view of the Eurasian plate a little further. There's some other slides. The Andaman Islands, Nicobar Islands, which are small islands, and northwestern Sumatra are located on the plate. This island arc separates the Andaman Sea from the main Indian Ocean to the west. So basically what we have here is a very small, it's not really a major plate, it's a subplate or a platelet, which is sort of sandwiched between two plates which are major. And you can look at the bottom of the diagram here and see the Australia plate, and then look at the top of the diagram and say the India plate. Now we'll get to this a little bit later. The Australia plate and the Indian plate generally move together as one. It's considered to be, they're separate plates, yes, but when they move together as if they're joined at the hip. So, and according to certain information, the Indo-Australian plate is the major break in the entire planet, the entire globe, for every other plate, every other tectonic plate, both major and minor. So when the Indo-Australian plate moves, and we've seen from the previous slide that it's moving all the time as the eastern edge continues to lift, then it's going to have repercussions right around the world, because this is the break. The Indo-Australian plate is the tectonic plate braking mechanism, braking gear for the entire planet. And when the brakes come off, and they're well and truly off now, my friends, we are going to see some major movement in the Indo-Australian, and that's going to affect every plate right around the world. So to study tectonic plates, we look at individual tectonic plates and consider them separate, which is a good way to start, not a bad way to start. But we have to realize that we're looking at a major jigsaw puzzle, a global jigsaw puzzle, if we go down deep enough beneath the surface. And these tectonic plates, as they move, they shift and shake, and they're moving and shifting and shaking like they haven't done for the last 3,500 years. This will have major effects right around the world. And that's all being covered up by the authorities, the powers that be, the scientists, especially the geophysicists, geologists. They don't want us to know about it. Well, or they received orders from the predatory elite, the really bad guys, that if you talk about this, your life will be in danger. So they shut up and just go along for the ride. Okay, can we see the next slide, please?
I just wanted to say something about the big quake that we had on Boxing Day. And of course, there was a large loss of life. And I've seen it reported as anywhere from 8.7 to 9.3. And if we consider that the 9.3 is probably still at the low end, it could even have been a 10. And I've always known that we had a minor pole shift. And I found this little quote that I thought was interesting, because it says the world rang like a bell after the Sumatran earthquake of 2004, and the shock waves produced by the magnitude 9 circled the world for several days. So says Clive Collins. And of course, what we're trying to avoid is a major pole shift. Now, a minor pole shift, we have major loss of life, but the majority of humans still get to stay on the planet. Yeah, so there's a minor pole shift, literally 20 years ago. Okay, let me go to the next slide, Zachary. Sorry.
Okay, this is the map of the Burma plate from Wikipedia. And it's the section in red, light red in the center there. Now you can see that this little plate, subplatelet, it's sandwiched between the Indo-Australian plate to the west, to the left, and the Sunda plate to the east. Now, if we could go further down, we don't have the map. We don't have the map prepared, but if we could go further down the Australian plate, go south and go east, where it's no longer sort of vertical, it's moving sort of in a more horizontal line. The Australian plate, the northern edge of the Australian plate is pressing down or crushing down the southern edge of the Sunda plate. And that means that it's not good news for Indonesia or any of the islands that rest on the Sunda plate. In fact, Indonesia, the capital of Jakarta, is basically sinking. It's going underwater, not through flooding, which is what the authorities, the mainstream media, want to tell us, not through heavy rains, but because the northern edge of the Indo-Australian plate is pushing down, crushing down the Sunda plate. Now you look at the top of the map and you see the Eurasian plate. The Eurasian plate is a huge, huge tectonic plate. This is like the southern border, the southern edge of it. And you can see that it touches the northeastern part or corner of the Burma plate. So you can see that this plate, this Burma plate, is pretty exposed. It's in the middle. It's a sandwich in the middle of basically 3 or 4 major plates. Now, let me quote again from the Wikipedia entry. To its east lies the Sunda plate, from which it's separated along a transformed boundary running in a rough north-south line through the Andaman Sea. The Andaman Sea is the sea to the west of Thailand. And that little spit of land, the peninsula of land jutting down is basically Thailand and Malaysia. That's right, yeah. This boundary between the Burma and Sunda plates is a marginal seafloor spreading center. So it's spreading. The seafloor is spreading, it's separating, which has led to the opening up of the Andaman Sea from a southerly direction by pushing out the Andaman Nicobar Sumatra Island arc from mainland Asia, a process which began in earnest about 4 million years ago. To the west is the much larger India plate, which is subducting beneath the western facet of the Burma plate. Oh, interesting. So the India plate, the eastern edge of the Indian plate, is actually pushing under, moving under, sliding under the western edge of the Burma plate. So we get an example here of the tectonic plate movement, which has very much increased in the last 20 years. And now it's basically the worst it's been for the last 3,600 years. Okay, and there's a subduction zone which has formed the Sunda Trench. I don't know much about the Sunda Trench, but I understand it's fairly deep. So we can see all sorts of tectonic platelet, trench movements, subductions going on. So it makes the Burma Plate a very vulnerable undersea rock substrata section of the planet. And in my opinion, the movement of the Burma Plate is what basically led to the big quakes in Myanmar, Burma, and also Thailand just a week ago or so. Okay, next slide, please, Chandra.
Thank you. Okay, so there's just, it looks like a typo there. I should have O for ocean. So what we've got here is the South Pacific, but I've also, just late today, I included Kilauea.
Okay, now here's two good maps of the Indo-Australian plate. And you can see this is not a small plate by any means. In the map on the left, you can see the Sunda Plate to the north, and as indicated, the top edge of the Australia Plate, or the Indo-Australia Plate, is pushing down, crushing down on the Sunda Plate, which is not at all good news for Indonesia. It's terrible news for Jakarta, because that's going to go under, or mostly go under, God only knows. And yeah, you can see that the Antarctica Plate is south of the Indo-Australia Plate, then the Pacific Plate from the east is subducting under the eastern edge of the Indo-Australian Plate, which runs to the east of New Zealand, cuts actually through New Zealand through the South Island at Christchurch. And that's what Christchurch has been heavily hit by quakes in recent years. In fact, Chandra and I and one other friend were in New Zealand, I think it was 2012. And the first night in Christchurch, I felt Chandra and the friend were in another room. I was in my own room, and I felt an aftershock late in the evening. I think it was 11 o'clock, 11:30. So I went across the hall and knocked on the door, but they were sound asleep, so they missed the action, which is probably good. So anyway, this is a good example of two plates which actually move as one, and they affect everything around it.
Can I ask a question, Zachary? You see all the arrows, looks as if the India-Australia plate is moving upwards, and yet I thought I heard you say that one was subducting around here.
Well, you look at the Pacific Plate to the east. You see the Pacific Plate?
Yes.
That's what's subducting under the eastern edge of the Indo-Australia Plate.
Oh, got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, next slide.
Wasn't there some talk, Zach, about the Australia Plate pushing the Himalayas underneath, further up?
Okay, well, that's a good point. Let me elaborate a bit. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the eastern edge of the Indo-Australia Plate, or the Australia Plate, because it's being subducted, pushed up by the Pacific Plate, which is diving under to the east. What about the western edge of the Australian Plate? What about the western edge of the Indian Plate? Because the Indo-Australia Plate moves as one, basically speaking. Well, it's not good news, I'm afraid. It's really not good news, especially for the residents of Western Australia, because the prediction is, and it's a prediction, it may or may not come true, no timeline as far as I know. The prediction is that WA is going to go down beneath the waves. That's a prediction. Whether it happens or not, God only knows. What does that mean for India? Well, I'm afraid the prediction or forecast for India is not very good either. That edge, that northern edge, whatever, the eastern edge of the India Plate, is going to go down. And in fact, you may remember that several years ago, I can't remember the year now, Pakistan experienced huge amount of flooding.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, is Pakistan would be to the west of India, wouldn't it? Or is it to the east?
West.
It's the west. I thought it was west. Why did Pakistan get flooded? Well, the authorities don't want you to know. They want to keep you dumb and dumber. They want to keep you stupid and ignorant. And they've done a really good job of that for the masses. It's because that western edge of the India plate was sinking. And that's what caused the floods in Pakistan. It wasn't the rain. No, sorry. They did get some rain, of course. It was the sinking of that plate on the western side. Okay, I'm getting a message from Catherine a little about Europe. Well, in order to talk about Europe, Catherine, I'm afraid we would have to put up some slides of the Eurasian tectonic plate, and I can't. We don't have that. We didn't prepare for it, so I'm going to have to not do that.
Can I ask a question, Zachary? Were the Himalayas, are they the Himalayas there as a result of tectonic activity millennium ago? And what will happen to the Himalayas in the near future?
Well, the answer is yes. Basically, generally speaking, the India plate basically was subducting under the edge where it becomes the Eurasian plate. Mm-hmm. And that subduction pushed up the Himalayas. Now, I'll go ahead and be frank, because what I say may shock some people, but I'm going to say what I think is the truth. But it's hard to verify, because what we're talking about is a prediction, a forecast, and sometimes predictions come true, sometimes they don't. And even if they do come true, the important thing is what sort of timeline are we looking at? The prediction is that most of India will sink beneath the waves, and Sri Lanka as well. That is problematic, to state the obvious.
Mm. I'm sort of reminded of the fact that in the theosophical literature, we're told that in the age of Aquarius, that the trans-Himalayan retreats will be relocated into the southern hemisphere.
And which country? Which country?
That's because
which country?
Well, Australia and South America.
Peru.
Yeah, Peru. That's Peru. Right. So Lake Titicaca. Yeah.
And Bolivia.
And Bolivia, yes. And I know we were talking about going there a few years ago. Didn't happen. So I guess I wonder, is that because the Himalayas will cease to exist as they were?
Well, the Himalayas will basically be a seaside resort. If the prediction is anywhere near correct. We don't know what the exact line will be where the sea will go up to. But that's the prediction. And I would say, I don't claim to have telepathic communication with Lord Maitreya or Master Kutumi, but I would say that your analysis is quite correct. They said, yeah, well, we know this is going down. So we've got to relocate. I remember being given a book back in the late, I think it was the 1980s, by one of my friends in Canada, which talked about the relocation of the masters and whatever from the Himalayas to Peru. And this was back in the 1980s, man. Long before I knew any of this stuff or understood, what's really going on. So that plan has been around for many decades, to state the obvious.
Well, I think it was in the Alice Bailey books written in the 1940s, that prediction. I think it may be in the...
Oh, so that's even older, according to if it was in Alice Bailey's, of course, it would be...
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've read it. I think it's probably in the Reappearance of the Christ. But I'd say it's the mid-40s it was predicted through the Lord DK that there would be a relocation into the southern hemisphere. And I know... anyway, I'll just let you continue.
Okay, well, I'm basically finished here. We can go to the next slide if you want.
Okay.
Well, this is a close-up of the Sunda plate, and we've seen other diagrams about it. We've seen the Sunda Trench on the left of that, where the Indian plate to the west is subducting, pushing it up, sliding under the Burma plate and creating a trench. I don't know much about that, how deep it is, whatever. And the movement of this little subplatelet, in my opinion, caused the caused the earthquakes in which hit Myanmar, Burma, and also Thailand, and caused such damage. And let's not forget that the movement of this little subplate is very much affected by the major tectonic plates on the east, on the west, and on the south. That should never be forgotten. So once again, when you look at the tectonic plate picture, you can start with an individual plate, whether it's Thunder Plate, Eurasian Plate, whatever, but you have to realize and understand that these plates are connected to all other surrounding tectonic plates. And the connection is like a jigsaw puzzle, which runs right around the globe. And that's not often understood or considered, even by myself. Sometimes I forget it. Okay, so move on from this. I think this was the last slide.
I suppose it's a bit like the health of a human. You know, you can't just look at the lungs without considering the stomach and the brain. It's all connected.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Do you want to talk about this chart, Zach?
Okay, what do we have here? March 30th of this year, so only
yep.
Only a few days ago.
Yep.
And this is Tonga, right? Well, we have Pluto rising just below the ascendant, and more importantly, we have the eclipse on the cusp. Is that the cusp of the fourth house? Yeah, between Mercury and the Sun. Mercury is on the left side. The Sun is on the right in the fourth house. So the fourth house in any horoscope, be it human or national, basically represents the very beginnings of life, where you come from, your very basic domestic start, and it indicates the domestic situation right throughout the life, no matter where you're living, whether you're traveling, living, whatever. That it basically represents your domestic situation. So for me, yeah, it's hitting that fourth house cusp, and therefore shaking the foundations. You could say shaking the very foundations of Tonga. And I should say that generally speaking, the outlook for the Pacific Island nations is not a good one. It's not a good one at all, I'm afraid, because generally speaking, there's not much altitude or elevation in any of those island nations. And as we know, we've seen, because of the rising sea levels in the last few years, that parts of these nations are getting flooded. I'm afraid as we get closer to the pole shift, which is predicted to be about 2 years in the future, sometime in the early months of 2027, it's going to get a lot worse. That's the prediction. Whether it actually happens or not, God only knows. But from what I'm seeing and understanding and trying to analyze and get to the root of, which is not easy, because once again, all this stuff is being covered up by the establishment. The mainstream media is of course not touching it, but even the so-called alternative media, and the alternative media has done some good work in the past. They certainly exposed the hypocrisy and sham of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, which I prefer to call scandemic. They've talked about the danger of the COVID-19 inoculations, which I usually prefer to call death vaxes, because that's exactly what they are. So the alternative media has done some good work on occasion, but on this issue, they've been completely silent, and they are, in my opinion, to be very much condemned and criticized for their silence about this most important matter.
It may well be that they simply don't understand, Zach. You see, when you have the understanding of the astrology, and then when you're trained to look beneath the surface as an esotericist, there are things to be seen. I mean, look at this chart here. There's 4 planets in Aries, so we must look at Mars. And Mars is in a difficult T-square between Mars and Chiron. That's the same one connected that was there at the eclipse. It's the one that was connected to the Burma quake, and it's hitting the body. This is the body of the people who live in Tonga. And this is not the first time. Tonga regularly gets quake activity in the 6s or the 7s. And, you know, if they need the help of New Zealand, really, because if they don't get help from their Pacific neighbours, they don't have another bail option. This is like Kiribati and, you know, the Solomons. They're all in the deepest disaster. And as Zachary's pointed out, there's the eclipse right at the bottom of the chart, which really indicates the Pacific Island people have to consider, is my home safe going forward?
It's not.
Yeah.
No, the thing is, you see, and we can see this is a good one reason why governments are covering this stuff up, because if the truth were revealed that most of these Pacific Island nations, South Pacific Island nations, are going to go down, that means that the population will have to have somewhere to go where they're just going to drown. And where are the logical places to go? Well, Australia and New Zealand, right? But do Australia and New Zealand want these immigrants from these countries? Well, let's be honest, they don't, because they're mostly poor people. So we don't want poor people coming into Australia. We want wealthy people with big bank accounts. Recently, I communicated with Karan here about the numbers of immigrants that have been let into Australia in the 2 years leading up to 2024. So that'd be 2022 to 2024. It's a combined total of about 1.4 million immigrants. Do you think the Australian government is letting in people who are poor or indigent? Do you think New Zealand, their conservative government, is eager to do that?
But this is the test, isn't it? I mean, we need to share. This is exactly the test associated with the first initiation.
Exactly.
And those in the South Pacific must look to their neighbours.
And I just had a thought while you said that, Chandra. There's talk in the Alice Bailey books, I think, about humanity taking the first initiation. But if we're not willing to share with very unfortunate people whose islands are going down, does that mean humanity is anywhere close to the first initiation as a whole? Well, I'll let you ponder on that. You can come up with your own answers.
Well, that's right. That's exactly the point. Is humanity up for it? Can we give up war and try and find and live in peace? Can we share, and can we stop particularly brawling around religion? Oh. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let me see if I can get this thing going. Oh, that's just another little map there just to show you Tonga out there around the, it's not quite in the Central Pacific, but it's certainly the South Pacific. Here's the, you remember the Mars line that was there in the Myanmar one? Well, we have exactly the same line. This is a corridor, the Mars Ascendant, and it's hard to explain it when I show you little pieces of it. It's a bit like Zachary's talking about the tectonics, how they all interact. When you wrap the chart around the planet, the lines go up and down and through oceans and across continents, and this is exactly the same aspect, the Mars conjunct the Ascendant, the dangerous one that was going straight through Tonga and down to where they had a 6.2 quake at the bottom of New Zealand about a week ago. And then, of course, if you follow,
well, once again, that's the edge. That's near the edge of the eastern edge of the Australian plate. And from what I'm seeing here, Tonga seems to be on the edge of that plate as well, or close to it anyway. And I'm sorry, you just don't want to be living in an area that's near or next to a major tectonic plate line running through. And as the good people of Christchurch have found out, to their chagrin, during the past several years. I mean, you just don't want to be living around a place where a major tectonic plate line runs under your city or area. Just don't want to be there.
And when I was looking today at the maps, and I followed, so I know if this goes down, it goes down south of New Zealand. But if you follow it up, if I can get the thing to move. And I haven't marked it here, but I'll show you. Just 1 second. It's exactly the same corridor. They're very faint. but there's a line, there's two lines, one Mars and the ascendant line, and they go straight through Hawaii. So it's exactly the same corridor, just continuing further north in the Pacific. And of course, Kilauea, which we know is a site in Hawaii for the Lord Master Ra and the Lady Portia, which holds violet fire and regularly erupts, burst into life again on the 2nd of April, just yesterday. And so all of these things that seem to be very disparate are actually all connected, as Zachary is saying, to the edges of the plates. And astrologically, we can see the way the energy's been directed through the astrocartography. Yeah. Okay. And of course, people are lining up to look at Kilauea. Yeah, it looks quite spectacular. It was a 6.7. I thought it was, well, see, now there's the discrepancies. You see, someone's reporting what's happened south of the South Island as a 7, and yet I've seen it reported as a 6.7.
6.7 would come from the USGS. The 7 would come from people who know what's really going on and want to broadcast the truth. That's the bottom thing for me. I mean,
and that's the line that you were talking about, Zach, where the plates converge.
Yeah, look. Yeah, it's right. It's right near that tectonic plate boundary.
Yep. This is Christchurch here. Yeah. And there it is, right on the edge.
Yeah, right on the edge. Yep.
So that was the 25th of March. That was 3 days before the eclipse. Yeah. So there's a tremendous amount happening everywhere. There's another one that I've thrown in. Now this is the South Pacific, and we've got two quakes have occurred in quick succession. Yesterday, a 6.4, and then somewhere else on this line down here today, a 5.3. Yeah. Now, and when I think when you see the plates, you can see how all the quakes. And these are just, again, quakes of the last less than 24 hours, I think. But that blue one is the one.
Right around the tectonic plate edge is nice. Generally speaking, you see what's going on, actually going on.
Yep.
Been recorded. It's been covered up, buried, hidden, suppressed. Is generally speaking the Pacific Ocean, and we're seeing a map of the Pacific between the western coast of South America, western coast of North America, and eastern coast of Asia, eastern coast of Australia. The Pacific Ocean is basically contracting. It's getting smaller.
It's getting smaller. Mm.
Whereas the Atlantic is widening. And of course, that's not being reported anywhere. Do you think any government of any country in the world wants to tell us, especially if the coastline of that nation borders on the Atlantic or Pacific? Do you think the leaders of any nation want to inform their citizens that it's not safe to be living on the coast? No way.
So does that mean that South America, the west coast of South America, is rising?
No, it's not rising. The western coast of South America is moving to the west, to the left. It's rolling. The tectonic plate, and you can see it from the map there, the tectonic plate on which South America rests is moving westward. Basically. That's why the Pacific Ocean is contracting.
Yep.
One interesting thing I noticed today was I did the chart for the Shigatse quake, I think it was the 7th of January, and then I pulled the map up for it. Now, just as the map for the Myanmar quake showed that it went down through Thailand and down to Indonesia and down to the southwest of Australia, the one that came out of Shigatse in January, and I'll just try and point it out to you here, it started here, it went up in a big arc, past Alaska, and then down there. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because I take them as signposts. You know, I wasn't thinking along the lines of Zach's talking about the tectonics, but of course the two are connected. But I thought, well, that was a direct pointer that said Alaska, the west coast, and it went all the way down. It just curved in this big arc down. Anything is possible. Let's continue. Yes, there's so much. Iceland and North America. I have travelled to Iceland, and I have gone from Reykjavik, which is down here, and you see it says the Reykjanes volcanic belt. This is a very dangerous part of Iceland, and interestingly, you can't see it here, but there's Reykjavik, and down here at the tip is where the international airport is. And so anybody who wants to come into Reykjavik from anywhere in the world has to drive through this active volcanic region that has been erupting enormously on and off for the last 12 months. Very dangerous. But the ridge between where the Atlantic, the two plates meet, the North American plate on that side and the Eurasian, and they're pulling apart. And I've been out to the place, what's it called? It's near Gullfoss, somewhere around, here, I think it might, no, that's not right. Where was it? I think it's this one here. I've been out there, and you can actually walk down through this ridge that has been created, and to one side is the American plate and to the other side is the Eurasian plate, and you're walking through it. And on one side, it's meters high, I don't know, 10 meters or more, and I forget whether that was the European plate. And then on the other side, it's 10 meters less. So there's both a widening and a disparity in depth. It's very interesting, Iceland. Yeah, okay. And I did this one just to show you. Again, you'll see the same things. It's the Mars Chiron square, yeah, that's dynamically involved in this fire coming out of Iceland. But interestingly, there's something else going on there. What was it? Oh, yes, it's hard to see. Uranus, the planet Uranus, here it is. Right there is square the ascendant and the descendant. So Uranus is the planet that's normally associated with earthquakes, whereas in fact the Myanmar one, the current ones are the Mars Chiron square. So Iceland, the volcano, has both. Yeah. And then you'll notice the planet Pluto sitting quietly up here and of course we're so close to the poles. That is the 12th house, yes. Pluto's sitting there very quietly. There's more to come out of this Grindavik volcano. And I mean, they moved all the people. I think there's a small town nearby, and they moved all the people out of there last year. But you can see the highway. If you look in the picture here, this is the road that joins the airport to the capital city.
It's the highway to hell.
Yeah, and they're cactus. They don't have another road. I mean, it's probably 8 or 9 years since I've been to Iceland, and I remember at the time them talking about, well, we really need to build another road because of the, one road to the airport's not a good idea. And to my knowledge, they didn't do it because it's a narrow volcanic peninsula to get to the capital. So they're in big trouble because the only other airport in Iceland is on the eastern side of the country, and you can only get there at certain months of the year. Other months of the year, it's just full of snow and ice and you can't drive through. Anyway, yeah, and it's 800 years since the volcano at Grindavik erupted, and it started doing it last year, yeah. And it's both volcanic activity and earthquakes. Yeah? So it's all happening, and it's down in that bottom left-hand peninsula. There it is. You can see it there. So this 6 hours ago, that was, what does it say, 5.2, 1st of April, 2 days ago. Yeah. So social media is filled with images of this gobbling up the main road into town. And I know the Icelandic people are very nonchalant about it because they live with volcanoes. And here's the astrocartography for this activity. And there's the planet Chiron through Greenland, where Trump wants, yeah, down through Iceland and down to the west coast of Ireland. Here's the Uranus line through Greenland, across the top and down to, looks like, Germany. And then over here we have the Mars line going from Norway, and I haven't drawn it very well there, and straight across the centre and down. Now, it's this bottom left-hand little peninsula that's under fire, but Iceland's commonly gets a lot of activity. Whenever you do the astrocartography maps, there are often a lot of lines, but here we have 3 indicators, Mars, Chiron and Uranus for the earthquake activity just in the last day or so. And we're getting late here, but I wanted to show you this. When I was looking at, you know, how big the quakes get around the planet. And as I said, it's the USGS that say, no, there's nothing bigger than an 8, doesn't happen. And then somewhere else you see maps that say 9.2, 8.3, 8.6, 8, 8.6, 8.7. So this is 8.4. So this is the North American continent on the left. That's right. No, that's Russia. Sorry. Russia. And this is the Aleutian Peninsula. And I was alerted to this because the seismologists are very worried about this region. There's a mountain called Mount Spar, a volcanic mountain that they think may be about to erupt. And the main town, whose name I've forgotten, is just here. So sort of less than 100k away from this very dangerous area. And some of the biggest quakes that have been recorded on Earth have happened up here around the poles. And I don't know, it sort of reminds me of, you know, if you filled a bowl up with hot boiling water, you'll start to get steam come. If you had a narrow aperture at the top, things would bubble up out of the top. And I wonder whether that's a good analogy for what happens at the poles. But I do find this very interesting. It's a very dangerous place on the planet. So 9.2 was supposedly the biggest ever recorded in Alaska, but then I found a 9.5 in Chile in 1960, and the Sumatran one of 2004, which is somewhere around the 9s, maybe even 9.4, who knows? So they're what we call the mega quakes. These are the ones that will send the minor or the major pole shifts. And the Aleutian chain. Yes, the Pacific plate going underneath the North American plate. And just in the last couple of days, there's some of the activity that's going on, 6s and 5s in the last 2 days. And there's the chart for it, and the same pattern. There's the Mars, there's the Chiron, there's the squares, up to the midheaven. So I imagine the government of Alaska is taking all of this very seriously. And I do find it interesting that we don't have, you see all the Piscean planets, they're down here in the 3rd house. So we don't have the international awareness of what's happening in Alaska the way we have, let's say, in Myanmar, but it's just as dangerous, extremely dangerous. Okay, I think there's Mount Spur. This is the one the seismologists are worried about, and that's the town Anchorage. I don't think many people live here, but I think most of them live in Anchorage, and this is the one that they're concerned about. And of course, they're all over earthquakes up here. They know all about it, and they watch them a lot. So to kind of sum up, as I said, I think of the earth changes and I correlate them with the birth initiation and the physical birth of a human child. Now, some people have a birth and they'll say, oh, it was pretty easy, you know, not too difficult. Someone else will have a very difficult birth. Someone else will have intervention of some sort, you know, anesthetic, forceps, whatever. A very small amount of women will have a stillbirth. You know, I think it's pretty true to say that we're not having an easy birth on earth. At the very least, we're having a difficult birth. Maybe some of humanity will need intervention, forceps, help. Maybe some of humanity will be stillborn and won't get to move, just to come back to earth. These are the kinds of questions that we don't know the answer to, but I hypothesize. How do we deal with it? We have to find peace. And as Zachary said, we had been talking about a month ago about the European Union leaders beating the drum of war rather than going, well, let's talk to the Russians. Let's talk. Yeah, we need to share food and housing, and we need to stop the religious wars. Yeah, we need to strengthen the will to good. I think that's all I wanted to say. Zachary, it's a very serious topic, I know. And
can we go back to the Alaska, to one of the Alaska slides?
Yes, this one, that one or further back?
One further back. One further back. Yeah, there, the bottom one.
The bottom one?
The bottom one, yeah. Okay, what is happening, but once again, it's being covered up, not being reported, of course, is that the tip of Alaska, which is the Aleutian Island chain we've been looking at, is being pulled south, whereas the tip of Baja California, which is in Mexico, it's a peninsula jutting to the west of Mexico,
oh, yeah.
That is being pulled north. So basically, the entire coastline of North America, from Alaska right down through parts of Western Canada, right down through parts of Western United States and down into Mexico, the Baja Peninsula, is being pulled into a bowing motion. It's like a bow being tightened because of tectonic plate movement. And that is what is actually happening, in my opinion, but it's being covered up, not talked about by the authorities. And that particular bowing motion is said to have some very serious consequences in the near future for the United States of America, which I won't go into further. So I just wanted to mention that point.
Yeah, very good. And as I said, you see it from the tectonic perspective, and I look at the astrocartography and I see the January quake in Shigatse, and it goes up and down the Alaskan coast and down the west coast of America. So the same kind of indicators. I just have lots of different links here, which I will post this on my website, and you'll be able to follow them all.